some people refer to the microbiome as like a rainforest. Like we have endangered species. We have many that have gone extinct. And some of the data's, and I don't like this because I don't like to speak in extremes, but some of the data is like, you can't get them back once they're gone, and I don't completely believe that.
What inspired you to write this book? Because I mean, you're a nutritionist, and I know that you're like one of the few people that, like me, love to geek out on all things diet. But your first book was about sleep.
Yeah.
So what then led to the pivot that that motivated you to start writing about nutrition?
Yeah. In 2020, I just said this downstairs, this is the year of the pivot, So the pivot for me was really being a nutritionist and then getting into this realm of like becoming a sleep expert, which I wasn't planning on that. It was just in my practice, I had folks coming in every day, one after the other, but we did take quality time and work with folks, with their intake form. We actually go through, if somebody's coming in and they're, type 2 diabetic, they're on metformin, whatever the case might be, I would work with them and actually kind of walk them through and reverse engineer the condition. Like, okay, so here's the beta cells in your pancreas. Like we go through all the steps and I'd see their eyes just light up. Like I had no idea this was going on inside my body, and just created this empowerment. And I wanted to see that replicated more often. And we really had stuff dialed in with, many different conditions. But for me, there was always a percentage of people that wouldn't get the results everybody else was getting. And I really felt at that point after, 10, 15 years in this space, but I really zoomed in on what I really wanted to bring forth in this book, which is the individuality factor. Every single person has a very unique metabolism. Nobody in the history of humanity has the same metabolism as you, and nobody in what's to come will ever have a metabolism. But here's the thing: your metabolism right now is not like you next week. It's such a dynamic, constantly changing fluid thing. And so we would create programs based on that person. And so I was just like, why are people not getting the results? This percentage of people is like 20%. And ironically, it would keep me up at night a little bit, just like, are they lying to me? Like, what is going on? And finally, after, maybe half a decade in my practice, like doing the work every day, I finally started asking people about their sleep. And it blew my mind. Like I could not believe what people were telling me. Like, yeah, I just get up every couple of hours, I'll go pee and then like, just get on my phone for a bit and then, how are you? And here's the thing, Max, and just this is an important point for everybody, especially if they're interested in helping other people. People want change, but they don't want to change that much.
Oh, so true.
All right. And we can lie to ourselves and say that that's not the case, but we're creatures who are constantly, and our brains are looking for certainty, looking for patterns. It's obsessed with finding certainty in patterns. And so when you change too much, that's a lot of times why folks fail at trying to change, diet programs or exercise programs. And so I knew this. And so I went into the data and I was looking for what are some clinically proven things folks can do to improve their sleep quality without turning their life upside down. Like literally they can just put something on automatic that's working and they don't even know it's working. And when I started to uncover, I could not believe that people didn't know about this stuff. And so this was like 2014, 2013. And since then, with Sleep Smarter coming out, dude, it's been unbelievable. It's the first sleep wellness book to become a bestseller. Like it just skyrocketed. Actually came out a little bit before Ariana Huffington. Shout out to Ariana Huffington, but I beat ya. All right. But my book was much more practical, just like here are the clinically proven strategies. And so there's no sleep beef, by the way.
But no, of course. But I would much sooner like to hear your interpretation of a study, for example, than Ariana, who's not trying to be like a sleep scientist, I mean, she's like a journalist and whatever, but you have like actual clinical experience.
Yeah. Yeah. And she actually reached out and shared, I've done some stuff with her as well. I had an early version of it that she had researched and used even in her writing, which is really cool and such an honor. But what happened was it ended up, it's like translating like, and people tag me every day. It was so freaky still. Even like yesterday I had checked, like somebody's in Japan, like a library, and just like taking a picture of the translation there. It's just absolutely unbelievable, man. But what that did was it created this platform. It kind of set me apart from other folks who are, nutritionists. And now I get to share the story and the message and what I was really born for. I really feel like this is what I'm here to do. And it's because for me, it's such an intimate experience of coming from a situation growing up where I didn't know that there was a difference with food. I didn't know that there was a difference between a fish stick and like a wild caught salmon. Like it's just stuff you eat. And as a result, the people in my environment, every person in my family has or already died from a chronic disease. It's just like it was just the norm for me,
Mm.
growing up in a family who's obese and, diabetic and heart disease and arthritis and chronic asthma. I had many of these things as well. I went through them. And having the revelation for me, and also, this too, there's many paths to the goal. For me, food was the bridge. Like that was the thing that changed me from the inside out. And so the reason I wrote this book, in a nutshell, is because, and I know you've experienced this as well, in dealing with agents and publishers, they say it without saying it, but they essentially say that people are stupid.
Mm.
Like, make this really dumb. Like, dumb this down. Tell them to eat this, not that. And I was going at it with them for like maybe a couple of years, just like, I'm not going to do this until this is done my way, which I don't even know if I'll go through that process again like that because I just want to share the message I want. I'm sick of it because food is so much more than this pithy little thing that affects your weight. Food controls everything about us. It literally is the very stuff that makes up the cells in our brains that enables us to have thought and feeling and emotion. It's the stuff that bonds us together in social structures. Everything revolves around food. It's everything, And then on the metabolism side, no matter of fact, on the cardiac side, right? We both know some of the top cardiac physicians in the world. They'll tell you they go to school for 12 years. They'll have 2 weeks of nutrition. What is your heart made of? The organ you treat is made from the food you eat. The blood in the veins and the arteries that you treat is made from the food you eat. There's nothing more important than this. And I'm sick of it. I'm trying to treat symptoms and not understanding what's at the core of this thing is just so unfortunate. And so my mission was to bring forth in a massive way, like a book can do, and help people to kind of open the door and start to see, because there's one belief system of like, for most folks, they relate food to weight.
Mm.
Nutrition and diet is related to weight loss for the average person. But that belief system doesn't have strong legs. And it's failed. Like folks just know that they know that, but it hasn't worked for us. I want to give that belief more legs. And so we add the leg of like, okay, here are foods and nutrients that are clinically proven to improve your memory, clinically proven to increase your reaction time and your ability to focus in a hyper distracted world. Here's clinical evidence on how food affects your ability to have patience and perspective take. And even your proclivity towards violence is affected by what you eat. And we've got the data on that. So we start laying down and creating, putting all these legs under that belief system. And we understand, oh my goodness, this food affects everything about me. It is me. And we can create a revolution in our relationship with food.
I love that. It's so true and so apropos. Like the timing for this book couldn't be better, considering what we just went through collectively as a species. The beast that was 2020. So much inflammation, like on
Yeah.
the societal level. And then when you consider, just the correlation, the fact that 60% of the calories that we now consume come from ultra processed packaged junk foods, right? And just, and taking into account everything that you just said,
Yeah.
that like what we eat has an influence on our ability to be patient, empathetic, altruistic people. It's no wonder, you know, everybody is just at each other's throats all the time.
Yeah. This is very real, man. We are wondering, I know a lot of folks listening, like, uh, my family member or my friends or people on social media, why aren't they listening? Like we've got this data over here that contradicts this other information. Why aren't people able to like process, take time and like understand another perspective? We are, Max, this is real. Like every opportunity I get, I'm going to keep saying this stuff. We are the sickest nation in the history of the world. Self-inflicted. Let's be clear. Self-inflicted. Right now in America, we have over 200 million people who are overweight or obese. That number, we can't even, it doesn't make sense. Like we can't really process that well. We have over 135 million people who are type 2 diabetic or pre-diabetic. It makes no sense. Right now, over 60% of the population have some degree of heart disease. Right now, 115 million people on average are sleep deprived. What? And On top of that, about 70% of the population is on pharmaceutical drugs.
Mm.
The system is already doing what it's designed to do, which is to feed into and basically have the farming, the hyper farming of sick people. And we know so many wonderful people who are in this space. I got into this space to help people. But if you take really smart people and you teach them the wrong thing, they become world class at doing the wrong thing, which is treating symptoms and not addressing underlying causes of diseases. And so, with that said, heart disease every year is the number one killer. Every year, cancer, number two killer. The third leading cause of death is iatrogenesis, physician created illness.
Mm.
Johns Hopkins, anybody can look it up. Our system it's not that it's broken, it was designed to be this way. And it's unfortunate, but we have to look at this stuff so we can fix it. And like you said, 2020 coming along, because the system before this is so like concrete and stable. It's hard to change it. Now when stuff starts to get a little bit fluxed up,
Mm.
it becomes more malleable. And I'm excited about it, man. Like at first, of course, I was resisting and just like, why is this happening? And now I love it. Like I want 20, this is going to sound crazy. I want 2020 to keep going until we get it.
Until
Like,
we get it. Yeah.
yeah. And so it's ironic and beautiful. It's poetic, but it's what's needed because things were not working. It wasn't like this is just out of nowhere. These issues are festering underneath the surface all this time. And we're still trying to take the same approach to it. If we could just come up with a drug, we can fix people, right? How has it worked out for us? And if we just take an honest perspective, something is wrong. And a part of that is, of course, like, what are we making ourselves out of? We cannot drug ourselves out of making ourselves out of absolute garbage, stuff that humans were never designed to consume. And this is really basic stuff. But here's the thing too, and this is where I come in at is like, we got to make it attractive. We've got to make it fun. We've got to make it approachable. And it's never been more challenging because of our attention is being pulled away so frequently. But at the same time, it's never been so much opportunity.
Mm.
It just depends on how you look at all this stuff.
You must, I mean, like me, I feel like you must love nutrition. Like you must love, like I wake up every day and I'm just like excited to scan the university press releases for like new studies and things like that. And the amount of gratitude, the amount of gratification that I get, is that a word? Gratification? Just the amount of joy that I get when something clicks in my brain, that feeling of insight.
I know what you're talking about.
It's the best feeling ever. And that's why, I'm just so glad that you're doing that you're doing what you do. So how do we then transmute that feeling to everybody else? Because I feel like if we could do that, right?
Yeah, I think and we're already doing it, man. It's contagious, I had so many when you're saying it, like I had so many of those experiences by myself in my office writing this book. And I'm just like, oh my God. Like, and it's so funny. And then I catch myself and I'm just laughing at myself. Like, it's such a nerd, but I'm a cool nerd. What's so interesting is that I believe that part of it in being able to receive the information and to have that kind of click happen, it's not that it's impossible when you're not feeling well. It's just harder.
Yeah.
And the same thing with having empathy and compassion and patience. It's not that it's impossible. It's just harder. And so what I want to do is stack conditions in people's favor, like get them feeling a little bit better so they become more receptive to the next thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I'm very big on practical, like on ramp, small, simple things. And this just kind of gets into what's in the book and putting it together in this way where folks can just really kind of lean into whatever their goal is. So we have to give people what they want. And right now, arguably our most pressing issue and just such a massive susceptibility to all manner of diseases, infectious diseases and chronic diseases is obesity. About 400,000 folks every year die with some kind of issue related to obesity and being overweight. And so with that said, it's a major issue, but I think what's been left out of the conversation is really getting the power into people's hands and teaching them how this stuff works. Our system of weight loss has been hyper focused on calories. All right. And so I have this thing in me. I always think about, like, when I hear it, I'm like, where the hell did it come from? There was not like when you see the hieroglyphics on the pyramids, like there's not like a plate of calories. Or like, it wasn't a thing. The ancient Romans and Greeks have this very physical culture. Like it wasn't a thing. Nobody was looking for it when it was discovered. And actually, it had nothing to do with nutrition when it was discovered. It was used in engineering and physics. But when it made its parlay into nutrition, thanks to Wilbur Atwater, but he's kind of a footnote, even though we use the Atwater system, like that's what's on your product labels, which is just doing some math, basically. They're not actually measuring the calories in your food.
Hmm.
Newsflash. All right. But what really happened was, and why it's become permeated and a part of our lexicon so deeply, is thanks to a woman named Dr. Lulu Hunt Peters.
N-
Lulu Hunt Peters.
hmm.
She's a pioneer. She's famous, but also infamous. All
Hmm.
right. And so she wrote a book and it became a massive bestseller, sold over 2 million copies in the early part of the 1900s. That means, like, seriously, everybody and their daddy had this book. Everybody and their sister had this book or knew about it. And I went back and read these old fangled writings, and I could not believe what she was saying. I just couldn't believe it. Now, there were some big things that are still affecting us today that was put in the culture then. And she initiated the big conversion in thinking about food, which I already discussed a little bit. It's such a dynamic, multifaceted, powerful thing that's determining what your hormones are doing and what they're made of, what your neurotransmitters are doing, what your liver's doing, how your heart is working. Your food determines everything about you, but we put into this pithy little box. And it was largely due to this work, which was she made the conversion of food being food into looking at food as numbers.
Hmm.
All right. It made the shift from food being this multifaceted, complex thing to being numbers. She said in her book, you will no longer say one slice of bread. You no longer say I'm eating a slice of bread. You'll say I'm eating 100 calories of bread. You'll no longer eat or say I'm eating a slice of pie. You'll eat 350 calories of pie. Right. So it made that shift to now it's all about numbers. And she asserted that a woman who was her height, her same height, could eat whatever she wanted as long as she maintained 1,200 calorie a day diet. Right.
Hmm.
And she struggled with her weight her whole life. That's the side note that you don't get with the story. Now, that's one part, looking at food in terms of numbers now, instead of all the other things that it does. And actually the things that control what calories do, which is what we dive into in the book. But the other thing was she began the widespread indoctrination of associating food with morality. All right. So now she was pressing into culture like it's a character defect if you can't maintain your weight,
Hmm.
and relating words like punishment and sin. And so it was just getting you to this place where it becomes like religiosity, right? And one other little aspect, and this is actually a major aspect and something I really worked to address and fix this issue because I had patients coming in every day saying this stuff, like having this association in their mind, even if it's unconscious. She began the belief that if you're hungry, you're doing it right. If you're hungry, that's when weight loss is happening. And she said that this was down around again, like time of World War One. And she said, and I'm just going to paraphrase, for every hunger pang you feel, you should have a double joy, knowing that you're saving the hunger pangs in someone else because of the food rationing. You're saving the hunger pains in a hungry child, right? So you're showing patriotism for your country and you're losing weight at the same time. You should have a double joy, right? And so the big problem with
She might
this,
have had an eating disorder.
well, there you go.
I mean,
There you go. But this is where the roots come from, and these ideas just permeated the culture. And today we know that it's not just about like you're hungry and weight loss is happening. If you're hungry, these are signals from your body that something is wrong. And we dive into what all those things are and actually what is controlling hunger, and the hormones involved. A lot of folks, of course, know about like leptin and ghrelin. These are like the captains, but there's, CCK, there's GLP-1. And one of the most poetic things about nature and how we're designed is that our leptin, which is the major satiety hormone, is actually produced by the fat cells. And you would think, all right, I've got all of this fat on my body. I should be feeling very satisfied because leptin is a satiety hormone. Why am I not satisfied? And I make the connection and the kind of analogy that I weave throughout the book of our hormones because our hormones are controlling so much. It's just like I refer to them as like metabolic DMs,
Hmm.
right? So it's like sending little text messages or emails or, pinging your other cells to keep everybody in touch. But if there's so much, what happens if somebody puts you in a group text and all this crazy stuff, or, you're getting spammed, it goes to the spam box. You start to have resistance to that data coming in, right? And it gets flagged. That's what happens when we are bombarded and your body fat gets to this place, like the signal that leptin is getting produced by your cells. It's still getting produced, but the receptor sites start to shut down. You start to have resistance
Hmm.
because of that constant spamming, right? And so we have to address these underlying issues, right? We have to address the leptin sensitivity. What are the things we can do when there's so many cool things we could do? But this isn't being taught when the experts are saying, just get in a calorie deficit. Get in a calorie deficit. It's so unfortunate. I'm sick of it. And I'm going to make sure everybody knows what's really controlling what calories are doing.
I so appreciate that. So important. Yeah, because I feel like to dial everything down to calories is really insulting to people who are struggling in the face of the modern food supply. That just at every, with every morsel is just compelling you to eat more and to eat more and to eat more. And we now have data. Like we have data, that whole thing from Dr. Peters that you just explained, we know that scientifically that the only time you're going to be hungry is when you're trying to consume a calorie deficit and you're basing your diet primarily around ultra processed foods. Because for the same degree of satiety, whole foods actually they fill you up and you come in at a calorie deficit naturally, right? Whereas ultra processed foods, you get filled up the same degree of satiety and you're actually in a surplus. So you actually shouldn't be hungry. And so that's a really interesting thing that you bring up about leptin. So the more fat cells you have, you would think that your satiety, you'd be more satiated and that your metabolism would be faster, but you actually develop leptin resistance.
Yeah.
So yeah, what do we do to solve that problem?
Well, I want to address what you just said, the ultra processed foods versus whole
Mm,
foods, because now we have real world because of course we've known for years, like, the quality of food matters, right? It should just be obvious, but now we really know. And so one of the studies that I mentioned was highlighted in the journal Food and Nutrition Research. And the scientists wanted to find out what actually happens with your caloric expenditure or caloric absorption when you eat a meal of processed foods versus a meal of whole foods.
hmm.
And so they had the test subjects to consume either a sandwich of what they deemed to be whole foods, which was multigrain bread and cheddar cheese, or a sandwich of processed food, which was white bread and cheese product, which that's Kraft, by the way. They can't legally call it cheese, you know?
The-
So
Can't these scientists be a little more creative?
I mean,
You know?
it's levels to it all, Max.
Hmm.
It's levels
Hmm.
to it. But here's what happened. Okay. They're the same amount of calories. The sandwich are the same amount of calories, same amount of proteins, carbohydrates, and fat. Same on paper. But the subjects who ate the processed food sandwich had a 50% reduction in calorie burn after eating that sandwich.
Wow.
Their body, their metabolism changed. Their hormones changed in a way that made them retain and hold on to more of that energy they consumed. It created these hormonal clogs. So again, in the conversation about a calorie deficit, some of these things aren't going to matter if we're not addressing these things that are controlling what calories are doing in the body, right? And that's just one of them. There's like five major factors that I cover in the book. And then with leptin sensitivity, that one shift in of itself, moving away from the processed foods to more what we call whole foods. And of course, there's so many levels to what that looks like. It changes how your body is associating, how your cells are associating with each other, kind of clearing up that line of communication. So leptin's message is getting heard now by the cells again. And another really important thing that, this is really kind of like the final frontier of where we are right now. We've learned so much this in the last couple of years, but we still don't know anything. Like, we don't know anything, which is the gut, what's happening in the gut.
Hmm.
And our gut bacteria are really the first decision makers on whether or not you're going to absorb those calories, what's going to happen with those calories. And this was highlighted in the journal Cell. They found that they discovered a certain bacteria in mice they basically blocked their intestines from absorbing as many calories from their food. And then to see that on the surface, some folks are like, can we get a bottle of that bacteria, whatever that is, so I can stop absorbing so many calories?
That's what I'm wondering. Just
That-
kidding.
Now, here's the thing. That's not necessarily a good thing, right? But we couple that with human studies, and this was from the Weizmann Institute. We know, and I knew this in my clinical practice, I can have somebody go get a stool sample and I can get their report. We know today I can look at the bacteria makeup that you have and never see you and know whether you are obese or not based on your bacteria cascade. There is a bacteria cascade associated with obesity and insulin resistance. So this quote fat bacteria in human test subjects, they took these fecal samples and put them into lean mice, and they took healthy human samples and put them into lean mice. The lean mice who received the quote fat bacteria from humans immediately had insulin resistance, gained weight, and increased body fat
Wow.
simply by changing the bacteria cascade. And to put a little like cherry on top for this, a little bit before I go crazy with it. This one blew my mind. Identical twins. They took identical twins. All right, they're identical, but they'll tell you, of course, like I'm not the same as my, whatever,
Of course.
But identical twins, so everything should be the same about them, right? And they found that when one twin had the bacteria cascade associated with obesity and insulin resistance versus a healthy kind of what's deemed to be healthy cascade in identical twins eating the same exact diet, the twin with the quote fat bacteria more prevalent gained weight while the other one did not, eating the exact same diet. So again, when we're talking about getting into a calorie deficit and managing what's happening with our calorie intake, our microbes have a major, major role in this stuff. And also our microbes are associating with cells that are responsible for the metabolizing our hunger-related hormones. And some of our, satiety-related hormones, some of our satiety-related hormones like GLP-1, some of these are actually produced in the gut, right? So getting our appetite in control has a lot to do with that microbiome. And yeah, so
That's so freaking cool, Shawn. And it's also like, I mean, it's a really important piece of the puzzle because I think, you know, the association between like different microbial signatures with like the phenotype, like the big question mark there is like, is this microbiome composition like the consequence of, reflective of, or the cause of,
right.
What we see in the person? But like in that study that you cited, what's so interesting is that they actually like took the microbiome out of an obese person and they put it into the mouse and they saw the mouse phenotype change.
Yeah.
So that's fascinating.
Oof.
So let's go into like the prescription.
Yeah.
Because I know you're all about that, like making things actionable and achievable for your audience. So how do we then like support microbiome health? What are the kinds of foods that you recommend we steer towards? What are the kinds of foods that you recommend that we steer away from? Like what's your how is your and also how has your dietary philosophy evolved, over the course of writing this book?
Yeah. Oh man, such a good question. Again, I think the heart of all of it is understanding that you have a unique metabolism and we have to be open. Like for me, even going into this book, I knew that there was a lot of infighting in our community about minutia and not really focusing on what are the main principles that make any of these diet frameworks successful. And so many people develop this, it's like religiosity around their diet when it's successful for them, but over maybe they do it for 2 years even, it's working, but then all of a sudden it's not working as well. And we blame the diet. No, I'm sorry. We don't blame the diet. We blame ourselves.
Mm.
It's just like, I need to paleo harder. I just need to keto harder. I need to vegan harder, right? I'm not veganing enough. I really need to clean up my act. And of course, there are pieces of that can be true, but sometimes our diet frameworks don't allow for the thing that you need right now, and we have to, my mission is for us to just open up a little bit and give ourselves permission to have the thing that your genes, your microbiome might be calling for to help to heal you. And so with that said, this is really rooted in, we're talking about that microbiome cascade. I did so much experimentation myself. Like I couldn't really speak from a place of efficacy if I didn't do this stuff myself. So I'll do the diet, but I'll do it for a year, 2 years, 3 years. Raw food, okay, I'll do it for a year. Keto, okay, I'll do it for a year. Paleo, I'll do it for 2 years, Vegan, give me 3. Like I've done this stuff.
Geez, 3 years on a vegan diet.
It's 5. But here's the thing. Each of these changes in your nutrient intake changes your microbes. That is the number one thing when we're talking about helping to heal this issue, is knowing that number one, the diversity of your microbes is directly associated with the higher your diversity, the lower your rate of obesity, the lower your rate of diabetes, the lower your correlated body weight. It's directly linked. And so, in looking at hunter-gatherer tribes and just folks eating more of an indigenous diet, they found that on average, they have 4 times, upwards of like 10 times more diversity in their microbes than the average Western world person, that eating our typical diet,
Yeah.
standard American diet. 4 times more. Just say you have, I don't know, 1,000 different species. They got 4,000.
Jeez.
And so the question is, what happened? And what it is just like some people refer to the microbiome as like a rainforest. Like we have endangered species. We have many that have gone extinct. And some of the data's, and I don't like this because I don't like to speak in extremes, but some of the data is like you can't get them back once they're gone. And I don't completely believe that. It's really about providing the food source for the microbes to get a chance to come back. It's just like anything in nature. Like you have to have the food that you want to just stick around. And so when you pull out a whole food group, then maybe your genes really, but maybe you had an issue with the digestion of it because of the way it was prepared. So you pull the beans out, for example. This is not an advocation for beans. Okay, just calm down. But maybe for your genes and maybe for your ancestry, maybe this was like a staple. Maybe it was dal, like the mung beans or whatever. Dengu if you're Kenya,
Mm.
and maybe you've been eating it for centuries. But now you're here in the States and you're not making it the same way your grandmother used to or whatever. And now like you have some digestive issues or maybe like skin issues, and then you do an elimination diet and you remove this, and the microbes go too, because they were eating that food. That was the prebiotic, right? These terms, but we really got to get this. It's not just like a supplement you take. This is the food for your microbes. And so that's at the heart of it. Number one is being more focused and on diversity, because the number one, and I shared a really great study in Eat Smarter of increasing your diversity of foods increases your diversity of microbes,
Mm.
which is just so obvious, but we have data on it now. So even if we're eating healthy, quote healthy, we still can get into the meal prep gone awry, where it's just like, you're doing the same stuff just on rotation, and we need more diversity, So some of the common prebiotic foods is like, asparagus, Jerusalem artichoke, onions and garlic. We hear these things, but some of the most fascinating, I think so much science is going to come out in the upcoming years, is resistant starch,
Hmm.
and I was resistant to resistant starch.
You were resistant to resistant starch,
Yeah,
Shawn
yeah.
Stevenson?
We could put that. That's a tweetable. That's a tweetable. And I was having, this was many years ago, but I was experiencing dysbiosis because of all the experimentation I was doing. And I was eating what I believed to be the right thing. But over time, like I start to have more food sensitivities. And so I would just like, oh, let's just eliminate that. Then I got into my like safe foods list. And then I started getting nervous if I eat a different food, which then I knew like, oh, something's wrong. Like I got to stop this. And, a friend of mine, a physician friend of mine was like, well, maybe you should try adding in, this particular, which I didn't know at the time was a resistant starch. I was like, I don't know about that. Brown rice? No. I know it's got it's the anti-nutrients in there, gut irritants, but
Arsenic, too, in brown rice.
there you go. But it's got, when I was in school, in my traditional, like my nutritional science class in my university, and this was like, this is back in the day, I've been in the game for a while, but we were taught basically everything brown, you should be down, right? You should be down with it like brandy. Everything that's brown is good. The white is not good, right? So white rice out, white potatoes out, right? But the thing was that even then, I still had the insight. I was like, why when I go to, my favorite Chinese food restaurant, like I see the owners there eating white rice and vegetables, whatever. They're definitely not eating the hot braised chicken that I'm eating, But I'm just like, did they not get the memo that brown is better? What's wrong? Centuries, guys? Come on, guys. And what it was is just centuries ago, they figured out like there's a gut irritant here, and we could just, strip that away. And this is not saying that white rice is some glorious nutritive source, but it's just like making it safer for the average person. Okay, now that's just a part of it. It's a slice of it. Not to say that brown rice can't be helpful or healthy for some folks, but what can we do to help to reduce, the phytates, reduce the anti-nutrients? Soak it and use a pressure cooker, right? And so I started to do that. I would actually get sprouted rice, brown rice, and I start to add it in. I started feeling better. And I'm like, oh shit, like my belief system is starting to crumble because I was like, I'm not eating that stuff. Same thing. There's beans, but also something really cool that's coming forward in this work is that the colors of food are dramatically associated with the nutrition that's in the food.
Hmm.
Right. So this category of like white, beige, like brown stuff is high in resistant starch, potentially. And so here's what's the interest with resistant starch. So white rice, if it's cooked and then cooled, the resistant starch content shoots up.
Wow.
All right. And then if it's cooled and then reheated, it goes up even higher.
Wow.
So your microbes like that are associated, we got bacteroidetes and firmicutes. The bacteroidetes, well, firmicutes, if you want, this was the saying, I didn't make this up. If you want to be firm and cute, you got to reduce the firmicutes.
You got to
All right.
reduce the firmicutes.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so the bacteroidetes love, though it's associated with leanness, love resistant starch. Love it. And so white rice can actually be helpful, which is, again, that's very counterculture, but everything it's nuanced. This doesn't mean to start going ham on white rice, but I just want to make sure the data is available because rice is a big staple in many people's diets. How do you do it? And so I do like a little sidebar. It's called Rice Rice Baby in the book, and
I like it. 90s hip hop throwback pun.
One of the other ones, just a super common, is a banana. Okay. What a controversial food this is, but for, just growing up here in the States, like bananas like that handy dandy, go-to. But as we know, it's been genetically manipulated for a long time now to eliminate the seeds, and I put a picture of a wild banana in the book. They're like almonds, like they're like huge seeds. It was like really, it took a lot of energy and work to get anything from the banana. Like you had to work around it. And if you're eating the seeds, you're also getting fats along with it too. But they've been bred to be more sweet and get rid of those seeds. I remember even when I was a kid, there was still like these little bitty teeny seeds. They're gone now. Bananas, even if they're organic, they cannot reproduce in nature on their own anymore. They need human intervention. We've made them impotent.
Wow, we've made the irony too, given the bananas, the association that bananas have with. Anyway,
that's right. It was an awkward day in 8th grade health class for me, man. The banana came out, not mine. Never mind.
Yes.
There's a teacher is the demonstration, just to be clear. But as the banana, the green banana is high in starch, specifically this resistant starch. But as it gets more yellow, it starts to it transitions from starch into sugar. And so, but now nobody likes a green banana, Well, I'm sorry. There's probably somebody that's like, I do. But maybe if you take a little bit of a green banana and like throw it into a smoothie, you get some of that resistant starch. There's green banana flour is getting pretty popular right now.
They'd never even seen that. That's awesome.
Yeah. So like making little baked goods, just kind of, sliding that in there. But even if the banana is like ripe, like the yellow banana, but now it's like pretty high in sugar. But this still doesn't mean that it's bad. Like you could still, everything has its place.
Of course.
And if it's in combination with some other things as well. But there's still that one the little tip of the banana, that little brown tip, even when it's called the devil's anus. You know this? That little nasty part of the banana.
At the front of the banana?
It's at the bottom. That's right.
It's the devil's anus.
The devil's anus, yeah.
Never gonna look at bananas the same again.
That's right.
Every banana has an anus. Is that what we're learning here?
I'm thinking, was it Thor Ragnarok? Like they went into that hole. I think it was like, I think that might have been called the devil's
the
anus.
Cosmic anus?
Yeah, something like that.
Interesting.
Shout out to Thor.
I mean, we all have them. No shame, So bananas, man. If what's interesting is like you're so right. that they've been cultivated, right, to contain more starch and sugar than ever before in human history. But still, people are like, it's whole fruit. There's nothing wrong with eating whole fruit, and I agree with that. Like, eat whole fruit. But if you just kind of like extrapolate out, what if we bred the banana to be even bigger and
Mhm.
bigger and big? Like, at what point would it be reasonable to suggest maybe not eating them all the time? You know what I'm saying? Like, I go sometimes, depending on, like, the season, and I see apples at like my local supermarket,
Yeah.
and sometimes you'll find apples that are bigger than your head.
Yeah, it's crazy.
You know?
It's crazy. When they and the true origins of many of these foods, it'll fascinate you, when you find out the size of an apple is tiny. And also even lettuce. Lettuce was a narcotic, it's basically had psychoactive properties and they've been bred over time so that the lettuce, of course, those it was alkaloids. They bred it to be, just safe little unsuspecting whatever. Back in the day, if you ate a salad, I mean, you'd be higher than, Snoop Dogg doing that Mike Tyson fight. It's just like, what?
Yeah.
But that's one really cool aspect, but something else too in this domain. I actually put a study and I actually put a graph into the book looking at folks because again, you make the assumption the banana is clearly going to be better for you than a cookie.
Mm,
It
of course.
depends on the person. All right. Because the banana, again, is coming with some micronutrients and it's a real whole food. And not to say for me, it already supersedes it. However, if just looking at the impact on the blood sugar of these folks, some folks would eat a banana and they would get a crazy blood sugar spike and then the preceding crash, like they go hypoglycemic. And they eat a cookie, it's as if they ate nothing. It just
Mm,
the blood sugar just stayed so stable. Versus other folks, they have what you would think, which is like they eat the cookie and they have the spike and crash, and the banana is just kind of like a little bit of a spike. So, and what the researchers we're leaning into is that a big player in this is most likely their microbiome and how their microbiome is associating with the different foods. So one food for somebody could be detrimental versus somebody else. And this is stuff that we know, we talk about it, but now we've got some data. And I want to make sure everybody knows.
that's so interesting. I love what you were saying about rice being cooked and cooled. You know what? I eat sushi a lot, and
Mhm.
I feel very comfortable eating sushi rice because it's basically that. It's been
Yeah.
cooked and cooled, right? It's just like sitting there cooling off. Plus, they add vinegar to sushi rice, and vinegar
Hmm.
we know has an anti-hyperglycemic effect
Yeah.
as well. What's your stance on we've talked about plants and resistant starch, which I love, super important, surfacing that for listeners. Uh, what's your stance on like omnivory? Like, are you pro anti meat? Like, what have you chicken, fish? Like, what's your stance there?
Yeah. Again, for me, this is a unifier. Eat Smarter is a unifier. Whatever diet framework anybody subscribes to, they'll know the things that make it effective across the board and also the things on any diet framework that can really mess you up. And I call them like the three amigos of fat storage.
Hmm.
And what it really boils down to, and this is for me, I always like to just lean onto the side of rationality and lean onto the side of what have we done the longest as humans? And what do our genes expect of us? So it's a bigger conversation. It isn't just like this new trendy thing. Like, what have we done as humans? And so we evolved eating plants and animals. That's what we have to really just come to face to face with that. And folks can be like, well, there's this culture over here, they ate mostly plants. They still had some animal products. And this is again, we're talking about millions of years of evolution, even just in recent history, centuries and centuries, most recent. It's only been in the last few decades that we've completely, some folks make the decision to completely pull out animal foods. And I understand. I do understand. And also I know that you can be successful on a plant-based diet, but you have to be clever because there are certain things you absolutely need that most folks and the body is so resilient and also very good at storing things. So it might be great for you like the first year. Like you get a first year vegan? Oh, you can't tell them nothing. Oh my gosh. But then, see me 5 years from now. And always, of course, and then there's like the anomaly, it's been vegan, for 20 years or whatever. But one of the biggest issues that I want to make sure today moving forward for all of us. But in particular, I want to give a little sidebar for folks who are taking a vegan and vegetarian approach, how freaking important DHA is and EPA. Like, I want everybody to get this. This might be like top 5 things that we need to survive and to not just survive, to thrive as humans. And so, number 1, in looking at what's happening with the brain, our brain is the most ravenous organ. Like, it's only about 2% of our body weight, but it's absorbing and consuming about 25% of our calories. Like, it is hungry. And your brain, and this study freaked me out, but this is one of those moments I was by myself and I get to talk about it, Max. I'm glad. I could not believe this. Your brain will gladly absorb if you just let me relax. It will gladly consume about 50% of the glucose in your bloodstream.
Mm.
All right. So it's not a joke because we have these sugar gates, the blood brain barrier, just express pathway for sugar. And so when you're drinking a soda or you're eating, this crazy amount of sugar, the stuff that I just grew up doing every day, a tremendous amount of that is fucking up your brain, like immediately, and creating insulin resistance in your brain. You have receptors in your brain, the pathways into let's start there. The brain being that it's the most complex organ in the known universe, right? It's just so powerful, but it's ironic because it's also the most delicate,
Mm.
right? But it's also, nature doesn't come to the party without some equipment. You have your cranium to protect you. It's the only organ that's fully encased in bone to protect you from external intrusions. But internal intrusions as well can kill you. So we developed the blood-brain barrier. Now, here's the thing, and we know this has been something we've talked about for many years, how important fat is for the brain. Now, there's nuance here because your brain only allows in very particular nutrients. It is very selective in what can cross over the blood-brain barrier and feed your brain. And, saturated fat has been vilified and vindicated and vilified and vindicated. From real whole foods, pretty good for you. But as far as feeding the brain, because a nice portion of the brain is saturated fat. Here's the thing. When you're a baby, the gates, the blood-brain barrier allowing saturated fat in, it's like sopping it up like a
Mm.
biscuit, all right? Even mother's milk can be upwards of 50% saturated fat
Wow.
for a reason. It's for the development of the brain in early childhood. However, as an adult, it's all but not allowing saturated fat in. Your brain will make it itself. Wow, the brain is so cool. So now with DHA and EPA, now this is where it gets really important. The fats in the brain are not like the other fats in your body. All right. We have storage fats. When people are talking about like burning fat, the white adipose tissue, these are storage fats. So visceral fat, subcutaneous fat, intramuscular fat. These are storage fats. The fat in it was an evolutionary advantage to make sure that your brain is not storage fat so that in times of famine, your brain isn't eating itself.
Right.
All right. Now, the fats in your brain, these are structural fats. All right. And so allowing that to cross the blood-brain barrier, omega-3s, specifically DHA and EPA, these are really the core of the structural fats to make your brain cells. The structure of the cell, the signal transduction, the ability for them to talk. You have to have these structural fats. And so what the data found was that they took MRIs and actually found that the folks consuming the least, like under 3 grams of DHA, had massive amounts of brain shrinkage.
Mm.
And this isn't like the shrinkage because it's cold outside. This is like permanent mess you up.
Yeah.
And so here's the thing. And this was the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. They found that when folks simply added in more DHA and EPA into their diet, they had measurable, and this was versus a placebo, measurable improvements in their memory and their reaction time just by adding in more like these are things, it's just like, it's not just about prevention. This can make your brain work better quickly.
Mm.
And so the target here is just a little bit over a teaspoon of DHA and EPA. And then of course, for me, I'm always like food first. And this is getting into the conversation about what spectrum are you at with your dietary choices from vegan to carnivore. We know, and this is based on the data, that fish is the best source that you're going to find. And specifically fatty fish. So, salmon, mackerel, sardines, but also their eggs. So fish eggs, so caviar, salmon roe. There's like 10 times more in salmon roe than you'll find in salmon, which is again, like if you're freaked out by that, you don't have to have it. There's other sources. But then folks will have this, and this is something that I believed, when I was doing the vegan approach. I was like, I'm cool. Like I'll get my omega 3s from my plants. It's ALA. It's not the same thing. It's not the same thing. And ALA has value, and I go through and talk about that in the book, but your body, it's DHA is so important. Your body will convert some of the ALA into DHA and EPA, but you lose like at least 75% in the process, in the conversion process. So for you to get the amount of DHA and EPA that you actually need to have a healthy brain, you're gonna have to like beer bong chia seeds all day. Like you're just gonna have to constantly have that rolling in, and you might as well set up shop in your bathroom and just sit there all day.
Also, depend like there's variation in terms of the way different like gender differences, right? Like men, I believe, are not like effective at all. I mean, men can basically, like just beer bong ALA essentially and not enrich the brain with DHA at all as a result. Women, I think they, if I recall correctly, they have like a little bit more leeway and certain different ethnic backgrounds,
Yeah,
like,
all that matters.
yeah.
And of course, the microbiome. Like, what is your gut gonna do in this whole process? And part of what you just said, man, I love talking to you. Part of that is an evolutionary advantage to feed a baby. And babies, they're going to siphon from the mother all the DHA and EPA that the baby can get. It's critical for the development of the child. And so this is something that mothers really, even in pre-pregnancy, if at all possible, really make sure that our DHA and EPA levels are up. But that's one of those things, like you said, depending on our gender. And that's not accounted for in a calorie label, on a food label. None of
Right.
this stuff,
Yeah.
the gender differences. So that's one part. Now with the structural fat. So what do we do if we're doing a plant-based approach? And these are critical. And I hope I'm making this very clear today how critical this is. And that we could talk about other areas of it though too. But okay, so we have to look at where do you lie on your ethics, because in the data, so fish first. And by the way, with fish, and I want to see like, does this actually show up on, actually eating the fish? Does this show up in improvements? And so Rush University researchers did a study, and they found that folks eating just one seafood meal per week perform better on cognitive skills tests than folks eating less than one seafood meal per week.
Hmm.
It's right. We've got the data. But what has the most clinical evidence is fish oil. So many studies, like folks just taking a fish oil supplement and having improvements in declarative memory, explicit memory, reaction time, attention span, all this stuff. Placebo controlled studies. It's crazy. All right. Krill oil. We don't have as much data, but krill is pretty cool. And, it's got the astaxanthin and all that good stuff. But it's a microscopic shrimp that might be, like you don't want to kill baby shrimp, a super, 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 super duper baby shrimp, there's microscopic shrimp, but I would heavily recommend somebody doing a plant-based approach to look to krill oil, or then the next step is algae oil, which we don't have very much data on as far as like double blind placebo controlled studies, anything like that. But the DHA is there, it's there, and humans have consumed algae for many years as well. It's been a staple of some civilizations, but they also ate animal foods too, like cultures in Chad and in Mesoamerica, like the Aztecs, they ate spirulina, but they also ate animal foods. So we have to, I just want to implore everybody to make sure that they're getting the DHA and EPA they need, and whatever method that is, a whole food approach, of course. This would be something to look to with a whole food based supplement like a fish oil, krill oil, algae oil as another option.
I love that. So, I mean, if listeners take two things away from this conversation: to increase their consumption of whole food resistant starch and boost their intake of DHA, and the foods that contain DHA, and I'm sure you list them in your book. You already mentioned, the different fish types, but DHA is not exclusive to fish. I mean, you find DHA in, right, egg yolks, grass-fed beef.
Yeah.
I feel like people should expect to see a noticeable improvement
Yeah.
in their health. That's amazing. I mean, I feel like we can there are so many different topics that we could cover. I mean, I'm just looking at your book. It's like that's a thick with two C's. That's a thick book.
It's thicky, thicky, thicky.
Thicky thick, yeah.
Yeah,
People should definitely check it out. It's
yeah.
called Eat Smarter. Use the power of food to reboot your metabolism, upgrade your brain, and transform your life. Damn. I got goosebumps just reciting the subtitle. It's so beautiful, man. That's what people need.
Yeah.
I'm so happy that you wrote it. We're almost out of time, but before I ask you the last question that everybody gets asked on this show, where can listeners connect with you on social media?
Perfect. I'm at Shawn Model, SHAWN on IG. And I just really starting to get popping on there and be on there and like hang out. Before, I mean, I just throw stuff up there, different ideas. But it's definitely a place I hang out a little bit more now. Facebook, I'm at the Model Health Show. And I pop into Twitter and throw out some random ideas as well sometimes. Twitter's just fun. I'm at Shawn Model there as well.
I like your social media presence. You don't dabble so much in controversy in terms of like the nutritional factions. You're very moderate, which I very much appreciate. I try to be that way too, but I can't help myself sometimes.
Yeah, I
Uh,
feel you, man. I
yeah.
mean, there's definitely, again, 2020 is just bringing out, there's so much polarity. Folks are becoming more extreme. And this is, it just goes back to so many traditions, like having that balance. And again, I'm grateful that this is happening because we can see how quickly we can jump to the other side of things. And now I really want to say this, and this is so important to me for us to realize how little we know. Like we are just scratching the surface on many of these things, but we act like we've got everything figured out. And we're in this process of discovery. And once you think you figured it out, you're lost. And right now we have a lot of folks in positions of authority who are acting like they know what they're talking about, and they know nothing. They know nothing. And once we can get to that place of just being a student and having a curiosity and a desire to learn and to keep growing, it's like it becomes fun. And we can start to invite more people into that versus us acting like we know it all and got it all figured out. Like this, even this component with DHA and EPA, like this is super new. This is again, like I believe the ALA, like I had it covered. But now we have evidence, and as we learn new things, there's still then you find out that, well, there's actually 10,000 other things that I don't know about this thing. And so I just want to share that for all of us to kind of cultivate a spirit of like a childlike desire to learn and to grow and to have fun, and be weary when you come up against a presence that it's like this is the definitive answer, because I promise it's not true. In some instance there's a way that it is not true, even the things that are most absolute, and that's what science is. It's a constant elimination and evolution past our old belief of science. Where we are right now, we're epigenetics, quantum physics, and this made everything before it irrelevant. But our science, our systems right now have not caught up to where we are with epigenetics and quantum physics. We're still in like Newtonian science
Hmm.
with so many things that are taught in medical school. So I just want to share that, and to go on an adventure, and just to learn more about you, and also to know that the person across from you is probably going to be different. Whatever they need is their needs are probably going to be different, and that's okay. And we can all still have fun together, and conversate and talk about ideas. But the most important thing I want to keep directing people back to is to listen to their own body and listen to their own heart.
That's beautiful, man. I couldn't agree more. I mean, the last question that usually gets asked to people on this show is, what does it mean to you to live a genius life? But I feel like you basically, I mean, kind of answered it. But if there's anything that you'd like to add, I mean, that you really summed up what I think is, um, somebody who really is living a genius life, somebody who has that constant beginner's mind, who approaches topics from a standpoint of, I don't know anything and I just want to learn, like openness and curiosity.
Yeah.
Um, would you say that that's living a genius life in your view?
Man, that was like some Nostradamus stuff I did, I guess. I would add one more piece to it. And this is for the folks that, when we talk about a genius life, but this is the tough one, but it's also the most beautiful, which is not just being curious, but actually looking for and being open to being wrong, like
Mm.
actually working that muscle. Thankfully, my wife has taught me over the years how easy I could be wrong. Even when I'm right, I'm still wrong, you know? So when I'm going into the data, I am aware that I have cognitive biases. We all do. We all have beliefs about what we think reality is. And it creates a level of certainty in the world. Without that belief about how life is, things start to crumble around you. Like when things become, and this is a big issue right now with people just like, why doesn't somebody accept this truth? Like the data's right here. Why doesn't somebody accept it? It's because they're going to have to change their belief about reality. Like they believe that this thing is looking out for them or this system or this person. And so being aware that I have these cognitive biases, I've worked over the years to proactively go into the data and look at like, how am I wrong? How is my belief or how is this data even making me believe something that's not true? How can this be inaccurate? And I think it just brings people pick it up from me, just in my communication. It brings more of a kind of a evolved assessment of things, and if we can work that muscle of a willingness to be wrong and also a willingness to listen to somebody else right now, especially more than ever, and have a conversation and to develop more empathy and patience and start to ask like, why somebody feels the way that they do instead of just automatically judging them like we've got everything figured out. It's another thing we're hyper active at doing is judging other people. And, for me, these are all these factors that go into living a genius life. And I thank you so much for the question and for being who you are and encouraging conversations like this. I know there's a thread of us just being connected in this thinking. And, there's one little other small, tiny thing in this that I don't want to overlook. And, you know, for me right now, we're in a tough spot as humanity. It's a very complex situation. And coming from where I come from, on paper, again, just like that sandwich, I look like, I probably shouldn't be here, you know? And I got here where I'm at today because of exposure and just being exposed to ideas and to people. And you never know who you can help, like there are many times when somebody might have felt like a time, of energy might have been wasted, trying to get me out of whatever perspective that I was in. But everything, like we're a patchwork quilt of everybody that we're around, So provide exposure to other people, share your voice. Just know that you're planting seeds. Even if it doesn't seem like it lands on some fertile soil, it eventually will. This is a time for us to really just speak up and share our voice, share our perspective, have courage, talk about things, be open still, being open to being wrong. And I think we can all develop a more mature cognitive bias, right? For me, my cognitive bias, I'll just share it right here today since I'm with Max. My cognitive bias is that whenever something happens that goes for me, from my perspective, against natural human functioning, a red flag goes up. So whenever I hear something of like, oh, so we need to get this amount of sunlight. Now you're telling us not to, red flag goes up.
Hmm.
Not to say that that thing is wrong, but a red flag goes up. And so it makes me want to investigate it, but I'm aware that it's there. Right now, we've seen this radical increase and I shared the data back in like June, processed foods. There was companies that were going out of business, like big corporate processed food companies. They're rolling in it. They're Scrooge McDucking it now.
Mm.
Like this was gold for them, right? So when that happens, red flag goes up for me. Wait, we're shutting things down. People are consuming far more processed foods. What is it going to do to us? Make us more susceptible to everything.
Yes.
So I think that we can develop more mature cognitive biases. And I know I just like took the genius like question, but this for me is really where we need to get to is to be open, to be aware of our cognitive biases, be willing to be wrong, and be willing to be patient, talk with other people, have courage to stand up. These are some of the most powerful qualities that you can not just develop, but allow yourself to have right now. We got to stop suppressing our genius, really allow it to flower right now because the world really needs it.
I love that. And I love where you went with that. I don't really have a very strong authority bias, and so I totally relate to what you're saying about, just remaining skeptical. Like, be safe. Like, use your just rational thought. Like, do what's safe. Don't take big risks. When your health is involved. But just generally speaking, like, don't be afraid to question things, even if they come from people who are your, you know, elected officials
Yeah.
or whatever. I mean, I'll just give you an example. Um, in LA right now, while we tape this, you can't eat in any restaurants. For a while, you couldn't eat in restaurants, but then they opened up like outdoor seating and you could sit outside in a restaurant and enjoy your food, which was nice. It was not the most pleasant. It's getting cold in LA, especially on the west side, but it was nice to be able to sit outside in a restaurant. It's very part of being human, and to enjoy the fruits of the labor of the human species, to eat in a restaurant, and they closed down restaurants because like COVID is spiking in LA. Not even allowing restaurants the ability to do that. A judge just determined that mandate was done completely arbitrarily with no scientific rationale.
Yeah.
And that they're going to reverse that order because it's to the detriment of the thousands and thousands of small businesses here in LA. Meanwhile, as you mentioned, mega corporations, junk food producers are rolling in it right now.
Yeah.
So something has flipped, and I'm not saying who's right or who's wrong or anything like that, but we just need to be skeptical because, some of the people that we put our, the most trust in, they don't have it figured out.
Yeah.
And that's clear.
Yeah. We just need to talk about these things, and when big decisions are made that affect all of us, we definitely should be bringing in multiple perspectives, not just one vanilla approach to things. Because for me, and going back into my conversation, the top cell biologists in the world, the top psychiatrists in the world, Dr. Daniel Amen with his brain scans, 160,000 SPECT imaging, to actually look at what's happening in the brain when we are talking about all this stuff. Does it actually work? Every one of these guys I'm talking to, from, psychology to psychiatry to epidemiologists, it's pretty clear across the board that they feel that the treatment of this issue could be far worse than the problem itself. And we need to talk about it. Like, what's the ramifications? I just had somebody message me yesterday, oh man, it's heartbreaking. But she said, her husband, he's had to close his restaurant like permanently after 30 years. This was their lifeline. And, she was upset, but she was also just inspired by, what I shared. And we've got to just look out for each other right now, do what we can to support each other and know that, I mean, man, there are so many people that are getting left behind right now. The kids, oh my goodness, that's what really fires me up, man. Like, we got to look at what about the mental and social development, like the brain. There are very specific, like, during certain ages, if those things are not getting wired properly, it leads to lifetimes of problems, potential, higher rates of depression, anxiety, suicide, just psychopathic behavior. Like, we're so attracted to serial killers in our culture, Dexter, true crime. Well, we could be creating a nation of Dexters, you know what I mean? Like, we have to be mindful of, like, what are the trickle down effects of these things and speak up about it, talk about it. We can't just accept it as normal. And especially when it comes to what's happening with our food, if we're not addressing what makes us most susceptible, right? And at this point, we are we are worse. We are even, what a goal to accomplish as humanity. We're even sicker now than when this started.
It's true. A new study just came out showing that.
Every level.
Yeah, we've gained weight on average. There was a New York, I don't know the study or the headline of the article, but it was in the New York Times and it circulated on Twitter, but they just found that. Just insane. Hey, if you like that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.
Well, cortisol basically tears down muscle tissue throughout the body, sends it to the liver so that it can be made into glucose.